It was supposed to be a quiet shift for Officer Daniel Harris. The evening was calm, the kind where the sky slowly turned from gold to gray and the hum of traffic faded into distant silence. He had just finished checking in on a fender bender downtown when the radio crackled to life. Unit 12, we've got a report of an abandoned vehicle on Route 57. Looks like it's been there a few days. Can you take a look? Daniel sighed softly but agreed. Calls like this were routine. Cars left behind, people forgetting to report them stolen, or just old vehicles dumped by the roadside. Nothing unusual. He turned his cruiser toward the highway and drove off, headlights cutting through the growing dusk. Route 57 was the kind of road most people didn't take unless they had to. It ran through open land, quiet and empty, bordered by tall grass and scattered trees. A few miles out, Daniel spotted the car. It was parked unevenly on the shoulder, half in the gravel, half on the grass. From a distance, it looked ordinary. A silver sedan, maybe 10 years old, covered in dust. He pulled over, stepped out, and walked toward it with his flashlight in hand. The evening air was still, almost too still. Crickets hummed faintly in the distance, but otherwise there was silence. He shone the light across the car, windows fogged over from the inside, license plate half covered in dirt. "Dispatch, I've located the vehicle," he said into his radio. "Silver sedan, no visible damage. I'll check the interior." He tapped the window with his flashlight, peering in. The driver's seat was empty. There was a jacket thrown on the passenger seat, a fast food cup in the holder, and a phone charger dangling from the console. It looked like someone had just left. The doors were locked. That was strange. Most abandoned cars were left open. Daniel circled around to the back. The trunk caught his attention immediately. There were faint scratches on the latch, like someone had tried to open it with a key that didn't quite fit. He tried the handle. Locked. He checked again with his flashlight. No signs of collision. Tires slightly deflated. It didn't make sense why someone would just leave a working car here. He called it in again. "Dispatch, I need a tow truck. Car seems secured. I'll try to get an ID from the plates." He crouched near the back and wiped away the dirt covering the license plate. The numbers were barely visible. He read them out, waited for a response, and stood back up. The night had gotten quieter. Even the crickets had stopped for a moment. Then, as he started to walk toward the front, something caught his ear. A faint sound. It was small, barely audible, almost like a muffled tap. He stopped, listened carefully, and held his breath. Nothing, just the wind. He shook his head and continued. But then it came again, a soft, quick sound, like someone trying not to make noise. Daniel froze. The sound came from the back, from the trunk. For a few seconds, he didn't move. His training told him to stay calm, assess the situation, but his instincts said something was very wrong. He stepped closer, his heart starting to beat a little faster. He leaned in, pressed his ear against the trunk, and listened. There it was again, faint but real this time. A small thud followed by something like, "Breathing?" "Dispatch," he said slowly. "I think there might be someone inside the trunk. I need immediate backup." The radio crackled, confirming his request. He didn't want to wait. He couldn't. What if someone was trapped inside and running out of air? He tried the trunk key release from inside the driver's door. Nothing. The car's battery was dead. He looked around for another way. That's when he spotted a small metal rod on the ground near the roadside, probably something that had fallen from another car. Using it carefully, he wedged it under the trunk latch and tried to pry it open. It took a few tries. The latch was stiff. Each second felt longer than the last. Finally, with a metallic pop, the trunk released halfway. Daniel lifted it open slowly and froze. Inside, lying on her side, was a young woman. She wasn't moving at first. Her eyes were closed and her hands were bound loosely in front of her with what looked like soft fabric. Not rope, more like a scarf or piece of clothing. She had a light jacket over her shoulders and looked pale, exhausted, and frightened. Daniel's breath caught. "Oh my God," he muttered. He reached forward quickly but gently. "Hey, can you hear me? You're okay now. You're safe," he said, his voice trembling slightly. The woman stirred, her eyes opening just enough to meet his. They were glassy, unfocused at first, then filled with recognition and fear. "It's okay," Daniel said again, this time softer. "I'm a police officer. You're safe. I've got you." She blinked slowly, trying to speak, but her voice came out as a weak whisper. Daniel didn't push her. He noticed how dehydrated she looked. Lips cracked, skin pale. She must have been in there for hours, maybe days. "Dispatch," he called quickly. "We have a live victim. Female, conscious but weak. Need paramedics immediately." He gently helped her sit up, supporting her back so she could breathe more easily. She flinched at first, clearly terrified, but when she saw the uniform and the badge, her body relaxed just a little. "You're going to be okay," Daniel said again, though his own heart was pounding. "Help is on the way. Just stay with me, all right?" She nodded faintly. The sirens were already in the distance now, backup arriving faster than expected. Daniel stayed by her side, keeping his flashlight low so it wouldn't blind her. She whispered something, but it was so soft he could barely hear. "What was that?" he asked gently. She took a shaky breath. "He left me here." Daniel's stomach twisted. "Who left you?" She didn't answer right away. Tears welled in her eyes instead. "Okay, don't try to talk right now," he said softly. "You're safe. That's what matters. We'll figure out the rest later." The sound of approaching sirens grew louder. The flashing red and blue lights washed over the scene as two other patrol cars pulled up behind his. The paramedics were close behind. One of the officers, a younger guy named Lee, ran over. "What's going on, Harris?" Daniel didn't take his eyes off the woman. "Found her in the trunk. She's alive but weak. Looks like she's been here a while." Lee's eyes widened. "You're kidding." "I wish I was." The paramedics hurried over with a stretcher and oxygen mask. Daniel stepped back slightly to give them room, but stayed close enough to reassure her. They lifted her carefully, asking her name, but she only managed a small nod before closing her eyes again, exhausted. As they carried her toward the ambulance, Daniel looked back at the car. It was strange, no signs of struggle outside, no broken glass, nothing forced. It was as if whoever did this had planned to disappear without a trace. He walked around the car one more time, shining his flashlight into the corners. On the backseat floor, he noticed a folded map, a bottle of water half empty, and an old photograph. It showed the same woman, smiling, standing in front of what looked like a coffee shop. It sent a chill through him. Whoever had done this had known her. This wasn't random. As the tow truck arrived, Daniel took a deep breath, trying to calm the rush of adrenaline still running through him. The night air felt heavier now. He stood by the roadside, watching the ambulance drive off with the flashing lights fading into the distance. He'd handled hundreds of cases before, thefts, break-ins, even a few missing persons, but this was different. He couldn't shake the image of her eyes opening in that dark trunk, the faint sound of her breathing when he leaned close. If he hadn't heard that small noise, if he had waited just a little longer. He shook the thought away. No, he had found her in time. That's what mattered. The younger officer approached him again. "You all right, sir?" Daniel nodded slowly. "Yeah, just didn't expect that tonight." Lee glanced toward the now empty car. "Guess you never know what's waiting behind a locked trunk." Daniel gave a half smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "No, you really don't." As the other officers began marking the scene and collecting evidence, Daniel stood silently for a moment, looking at the faint outline of where the car had been. The grass was pressed flat, the ground disturbed. Somewhere in that darkness a story was waiting to unfold, one he wasn't sure he was ready to hear, but he knew he had to. For now, though, he got back into his cruiser, turned off the lights, and just sat there for a moment in the quiet. The night had gone back to normal, crickets chirping, a cool breeze moving through the trees. But for him, everything felt different. He took one last look in the rearview mirror where the empty stretch of road disappeared into the dark. Then he started the engine and drove off toward the station, not knowing that what he'd found that night was just the beginning of something far more complicated and far more human than he could ever imagine. The hospital room was quiet except for the steady beeping of the heart monitor. The soft light above the bed made the space look calm, almost peaceful, though everyone who had been part of the rescue knew what had really happened was anything but calm. Officer Daniel Harris stood near the doorway, arms folded loosely, watching the young woman lying in the bed. She was awake now, though weak. A nurse adjusted her IV line and whispered something to her before stepping out of the room. Daniel stayed where he was for a moment, not wanting to startle her. When he finally walked closer, she turned her head slightly. Her eyes looked tired, like she hadn't slept properly in days, but they were clear now, not filled with the same panic he'd seen when he opened that trunk. "Hey." Daniel said softly. How are you feeling? She tried to smile. Better, she said, her voice low and a little shaky. Thank you for finding me. You don't have to thank me, Daniel replied. You're safe now. That's what matters. There was a pause. The sound of the monitor filled the silence between them. Daniel didn't want to push too hard, but he needed to understand what had happened. Not for the report, not even for the case, but because something about that night wouldn't leave his mind. Do you remember how you ended up there? He asked gently. She hesitated. Her eyes moved to the window where faint sunlight filtered through the blinds. I remember bits, she said slowly. It's all blurry. That's okay, Daniel assured her. You don't have to rush. Just tell me what you can. She nodded, taking a deep breath. I was on my way home from work. It was late, maybe close to midnight. My car was having problems, so I was walking to the bus stop. I saw a car pull up beside me. I thought it was a ride service at first. I didn't really think twice. She stopped, pressing her lips together. Daniel noticed her hands trembling slightly, so he didn't ask her to go on. She took another breath and continued on her own. Someone asked if I needed a ride. I remember saying no. Then, I don't know. I just remember waking up and everything was dark. I couldn't move much, but I could tell I was in a car. It smelled like old leather and gasoline. Her eyes watered a little, but she blinked back the tears. I tried to shout, but my voice wouldn't come out. I think I just waited. I didn't know if anyone would ever find me. Daniel's chest tightened. He'd seen fear before, seen people at their lowest. But there was something about hearing her voice, calm, gentle, still trying to sound strong. That hit him differently. I'm glad you made it through, he said softly. You did everything right? You stayed calm, and that probably saved your life. She gave a small nod. When I heard the car door outside, I didn't know if it was the same person coming back or someone else. Then I heard your voice. I thought I was dreaming. Daniel smiled slightly, more out of relief than anything else. Well, I'm glad it wasn't a dream. She finally smiled too, though faintly. A knock at the door interrupted the moment. Detective Laura Jensen stepped inside with a folder in her hand. She was calm, professional, but there was a kindness in her expression that made her easy to trust. Morning, she said quietly to both of them. How are we doing? The young woman gave a small nod. Better. Thank you. That's good to hear, Laura said, pulling up a chair. We won't keep you long. We just want to make sure we get a few details while they're still fresh in your mind, okay? Daniel stayed in the room but stepped aside, letting the detective take the lead. Laura opened her folder, glanced down at a few notes, and then spoke softly. We ran the plates on the car. It was a rental, rented 2 weeks ago under a fake name. The company's checking the surveillance footage now. Do you remember anything about the person who spoke to you? Any detail in their voice, what they were wearing, anything at all? The woman hesitated again. I think it was a man, she said slowly. His voice was low. I remember that. I didn't really see his face clearly. It was dark, and I didn't think I was in danger at first. Laura nodded. That's okay. Anything helps. Did you recognize the car? No, I'd never seen it before. Laura asked a few more careful questions. Where she worked, if she'd noticed anyone following her recently, if she'd received strange messages or calls. Most of her answers were no. Finally, Laura closed the folder. That's enough for now, she said kindly. You've been through a lot. We'll handle the rest. Just focus on getting better. As she stood to leave, the young woman reached out slightly. Will you find who did this? Laura paused. We'll do everything we can, she said firmly. You have my word. After the detective left, Daniel lingered for another moment. He didn't have to. His part was technically done, but something made him stay. You should rest, he said. You're safe here. There are officers outside the door just in case. She nodded. Thank you. Daniel turned to leave but stopped at the door. Do you have anyone we should call? Family or a friend? Her expression shifted slightly, a bit of sadness showing. My parents live out of state. I don't really have anyone nearby. Daniel nodded quietly. All right. We'll make sure someone checks in on you. He walked out into the hallway, the weight of what she'd said sitting heavy in his chest. Over the next few days, the case began to unfold slowly. The car was towed and processed. Forensics found no fingerprints except the victim's, and a few smudged ones that couldn't be identified. The gas station nearest to where she was found had a camera that showed the same silver sedan passing by just after midnight a few nights earlier. But the driver's face was hidden by a hood and poor lighting. It wasn't much, but it was something. Daniel kept checking in at the hospital whenever he could. He told himself it was to follow up on the case, but deep down he knew it was more than that. He couldn't stop thinking about how she'd survived, how close it had been. Each time he visited, she looked a little stronger. Her voice was steadier, her eyes clearer. She had started eating small meals again, even talking a little about what she wanted to do once she left. One afternoon, when Daniel stopped by, she looked up and smiled faintly. "You're back again," she said. "I guess I just wanted to make sure you're okay," he said with a small laugh. "You look better today." "I feel better," she said. "The nurses have been kind. Everyone's been kind." She paused, then added quietly, "I keep thinking about that moment, when I heard you open the trunk. I don't think I'll ever forget it." Daniel sat down in the chair beside her. "Neither will I," he admitted. "I've been on this job for over a decade, but I've never seen anything like that before." She looked at him curiously. "How do you deal with it? The things you see?" He thought about that for a moment. "You don't really deal with it. You just remind yourself why you do this job in the first place, to help people, to make sure they get another chance." "That helps," she smiled softly. "That's a good answer." Later that evening, as Daniel left the hospital, his phone buzzed. It was Detective Jensen. "Hey," she said, "we've got something." "We pulled more footage from the gas station. The guy filled up the tank that night, and we got a partial plate match. Guess what? Same rental company, same fake ID used last month for another car in the city." "So, he's done this before?" Daniel asked, his voice tightening. "Looks that way. We're cross-checking names and rental records now, but it means this wasn't random." Daniel felt a cold chill down his spine. "So he knew her?" "Possibly," Jensen replied. "We'll know more soon. I'll keep you posted." When he hung up, Daniel stood in the parking lot for a long moment, watching cars move past under the orange glow of the streetlights. The world kept turning as if nothing had happened, but he knew a storm was quietly building behind the scenes. The next day, when he returned to the hospital again, the woman was sitting up, flipping slowly through a magazine. She looked up when he came in. "You look deep in thought," she said with a small smile. "Just working on some details," Daniel said. "The detectives are getting closer to finding the person who did this." Her expression changed slightly, a mix of fear and relief. "I don't know if I want to see them caught or if I just want to forget." "I understand," Daniel said. "But the best way to move on is to make sure it doesn't happen again. And the best way to do that is to find them." She nodded slowly, understanding, though her eyes seemed far away for a moment. As the days passed, the case grew tighter. Small clues, phone records, and rental agreements all began pointing in one direction. The person who had taken her wasn't a stranger after all. He had known her from somewhere, maybe work, maybe through friends. Daniel didn't know the details yet, but he could feel it. The story was far from over. That night, as he sat at his desk finishing paperwork, he looked at the photo from the crime scene. The car, the trunk, the faint outline of the road behind it. He thought about how close it had been, how easily she could have been gone forever. He leaned back in his chair and sighed. Some stories stay with you, he thought, not because of the danger or the mystery, but because they remind you how fragile people really are, and how much difference it makes when someone shows up at the right time. And deep down he knew this one wasn't finished yet. The investigation had now been running for over a week, and every day felt longer than the last. The case that started with a single abandoned car had turned into something much larger, a mystery that refused to stay quiet. Officer Daniel Harris arrived early at the station that morning. The air inside smelled faintly of coffee and paper, and the soft hum of computers filled the room. Detective Laura Jensen was already there, her desk covered with folders, photos, and maps. She looked up when he walked in. "You're early," she said, sipping her coffee. "Couldn't sleep," Daniel replied, taking off his jacket. "Any news?" Laura pushed a folder across the desk toward him. "We got confirmation on the rental records. The fake name matches another rental from 3 months ago. Different car, same handwriting, same ID photo. Whoever this person is, they've been using a pattern." Daniel opened the folder. Inside were photos of the rental agreements, blurry copies of an ID that looked real at first glance, but the details didn't match up. "He's careful," Daniel said quietly. "Too careful," Laura agreed. "But not careful enough." She flipped another page and pointed to a printed image from surveillance footage. The quality wasn't great, but the shape of the man was clear enough. Tall, average build, dark hoodie, jeans. He was filling up gas at a station late at night. His face was mostly hidden, but part of his jawline was visible. "Tech team's enhancing the footage," Laura said. "But there's something else. We cross-checked the timestamps. The same car was seen near the woman's workplace 2 nights before she went missing." Daniel leaned closer. "So he was watching her?" "That's what it looks like," Laura said. "We also pulled the employee list from her job. She mentioned working at a cafe, right?" "Yeah," Daniel nodded. "She told me it was a small coffee shop near downtown." Laura's tone softened a little. "Well, one of her former co-workers, a man named Jason Miller, was fired last month for making her uncomfortable. Management said he'd been showing up even after being told to leave. He stopped coming by a few weeks before she disappeared." Daniel sat back slowly. "So, we've got motive, proximity, and timing." "Exactly," Laura said. "We're trying to track him down now. Last known address was in a nearby suburb, but he's moved since then. We've got a team checking local motels." Daniel rubbed his forehead. "It's strange, you know." She said she didn't see his face clearly, but something about this. "It fits too well." Laura nodded. "We just need proof." By noon, they had a list of possible locations. Daniel volunteered to check one of them, a small, low-cost motel just off the highway. He'd been there before on other calls. The place was quiet during the day, with faded signs and a cracked parking lot. The clerk behind the front desk looked up nervously when Daniel showed his badge. "Afternoon. I'm looking for someone who might be staying here. Jason Miller." The man frowned, thinking, "We don't usually keep guest names that long, but that name sounds familiar. Room 12, maybe? Is he here now?" "I think so. He came in late last night." Daniel's heart started to beat a little faster, but he kept his voice calm. "I need you to stay behind the desk and not make any calls. I'll handle it." He quietly radioed for backup and waited in the parking lot. The minutes felt heavy. Every sound, the wind, the hum of traffic, he seemed louder than usual. When backup arrived, 2 other officers joined him near the side of the building. They approached room 12. The curtains were closed, but faint light leaked through the gaps. Daniel raised his hand and knocked firmly. "Police," he called out. "Open up." No answer. He knocked again, louder this time. "Jason Miller, this is the police. We need to talk." Still nothing. Then from inside, a faint sound and movement. Daniel motioned to the others. "He's in there." A moment later, a voice shouted from inside, "Go away." Daniel didn't hesitate. "Open the door, Jason. We just want to talk." But instead of a reply, there was the sound of something breaking. A chair, maybe, or glass. They didn't wait. One of the officers kicked the door open and they rushed inside. The room was messy, clothes on the floor, an open backpack, and a half-empty water bottle on the nightstand. The window at the back was wide open, curtain flapping in the wind. "He's gone," one of the officers called out. Daniel ran to the window and looked out. A narrow alley led toward a fence in a small patch of woods. He caught a glimpse of movement. Someone running fast. "Over there." They sprinted outside, radioing for additional units. The chase went through the alley and into the trees. The ground was uneven, covered in leaves and twigs, but Daniel kept his focus on the figure ahead. After a few tense minutes, they finally caught up. The man had tripped near a ditch, out of breath and trying to crawl away. "Don't move," Daniel shouted. The man froze. When they turned him over, his face matched the photo from the cafe's employee file. It was Jason. He didn't resist after that. They handcuffed him and brought him back to the station. As they walked him in, Daniel couldn't help but notice how quiet he was. He didn't say a word, didn't look angry or scared, just empty, like someone who had already given up. Inside the interrogation room, Detective Jensen took the lead. Daniel stood behind the glass, watching. Jason sat at the table, hands clasped, eyes fixed on the floor. "Jason," Laura began calmly, "we know you rented that car. We have records, surveillance, and we know you were near the scene. We also know you knew the victim. So why don't you tell us what happened?" At first, he didn't speak. Then he looked up slowly, his voice barely above a whisper. I didn't mean for it to go that far. Laura stayed quiet, letting him continue. I just wanted to talk to her, he said. She stopped answering my messages. She wouldn't listen to me. I thought if we talked, she'd understand. Daniel felt a mix of frustration and disbelief from behind the glass. He'd heard excuses before, but there was something deeply unsettling about how casual the man sounded. You left her in that car, Laura said softly. She could have died. Why did you leave? Jason's face twitched slightly. I got scared. I saw lights on the road. I thought the police were coming. I didn't know what to do, so I ran. I didn't want to hurt her. Laura leaned forward slightly. But you did. You hurt her by leaving her there. He didn't answer. He just looked down again. When the questioning ended, Jason was taken to holding. The evidence was enough for charges: unlawful restraint, abduction, and several others. But for Daniel, the hardest part wasn't the arrest. It was what came after. He went back to the hospital that evening to tell the young woman the news. When he entered the room, she looked up, already sensing something had changed. Did you find him? She asked quietly. Daniel nodded. We did. He's in custody now. For a moment she said nothing. Then she closed her eyes and took a slow breath. I knew it was him, she said softly. I kept thinking maybe it was a stranger, but deep down, I knew. Daniel pulled up a chair beside her. You don't have to think about him anymore. It's over. She looked at him, her expression calm but distant. I don't know if it'll ever really be over. It's strange. You spend so much time trying to forget something, but it finds its way back anyway. Daniel understood that all too well. Healing takes time, he said gently. But you've already taken the hardest step. She smiled faintly. You think so? I know so. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The quiet felt different this time. Not heavy, just still. The kind of silence that comes after a long storm. Outside the window, the evening light was fading. The city was starting to glow again, cars moving, people going about their lives. Daniel stood up. Get some rest. Tomorrow's a new day. She nodded. Thank you. For everything. He gave her a small nod and left the room, walking down the long hallway toward the exit. The station would be busy again tomorrow with paperwork, statements, and court prep, but as he stepped outside and breathed in the cool night air, Daniel knew something had changed in him too. It wasn't just another case anymore. It was a reminder of why he wore the badge, of how close people could come to losing everything, and how much difference a single moment could make. Somewhere inside the station, a phone rang, breaking the silence. Daniel turned back for a moment, then smiled faintly and walked on. He didn't know what the next few days would bring, but for the first time in a long while, he felt something close to peace, because that night, when he opened that trunk and saw life staring back at him through fear and darkness, he hadn't just saved a stranger. He'd reminded himself that even in the quietest, darkest corners of the world, hope could still be found. Sometimes in the smallest sound, sometimes in the softest voice, and sometimes in the courage to keep listening. The courtroom was quiet, filled with that heavy kind of silence that only comes before something important is about to happen. Officer Daniel Harris sat a few rows behind the prosecution table, watching as people slowly took their seats. The IE case that had started with one simple call about an abandoned car had now reached the point everyone had been waiting for: justice. Jason Miller sat at the defense table, wearing a plain shirt and looking smaller than Daniel remembered. Gone was the defiance from the day of his arrest. His eyes stayed low, barely lifting to meet anyone's gaze. Across the room sat the young woman, the same one Daniel had rescued from that trunk. She looked stronger now, her hair tied neatly, her hands folded calmly in her lap. But Daniel could see it in her eyes. The weight of everything she'd gone through still lingered. As the judge entered and the courtroom rose, Daniel felt that familiar pull in his chest. He had seen justice served before, but this time was different. This time it felt personal. When the opening statements began, the prosecutor spoke with quiet conviction. He told the story from the start: the abandoned car, the discovery, the fear, the recovery. He painted a clear picture of what had happened, but without drama or exaggeration. The truth, Daniel thought, didn't need decoration. It was powerful enough on its own. The defense attorney tried to argue that Jason hadn't planned to harm anyone, that he had acted out of confusion. But every word sounded weaker against the facts. The rental records, the surveillance footage, and most of all the victim's testimony. It was all there, piece by piece. When the young woman took the stand, the entire room seemed to hold its breath. Her voice was calm but soft as she began to speak. "I remember everything from that night," she said. "At first, I didn't think anything bad was going to happen. He was someone I'd seen before. I didn't think I had a reason to be afraid." Daniel watched her closely. Her hands trembled slightly, but she didn't stop talking. "I woke up in the dark," she continued. "I didn't know where I was. I just remember the silence. It was the longest night of my life. And then, I heard someone outside. I thought it was him coming back. But it was the police. It was Officer Harris who opened the trunk. He saved me." For a second, her eyes flicked toward Daniel. It was only a brief moment, but it felt heavy, like gratitude and memory and pain all mixed together. Jason kept his head down. He didn't look at her once. When the questioning was over, the courtroom stayed quiet for a long moment before the next witness was called. Daniel didn't realize until later that he had been holding his breath. During the recess, he stepped outside the courthouse and stood near the steps watching the gray clouds rolling over the city. The air felt heavy with rain and the sound of distant traffic filled the silence. Detective Laura Jensen joined him a few minutes later holding a cup of coffee. "Long morning," she said. "Yeah," Daniel replied. "She did great in there." Laura nodded. "She's stronger than she realizes. Most people wouldn't even want to step foot in a courtroom after something like that." Daniel leaned on the railing. "I just keep thinking, how close we came to not finding her." Laura looked at him. "You did find her. You listened when most people might not have. That's what matters." He gave a small nod, though part of him still carried that quiet guilt. The what if that stayed in the back of every officer's mind. The trial continued for the next few days. Each day more evidence came out. Digital records, phone calls, messages that showed Jason's growing obsession. It painted a sad, disturbing picture of a man who had let his bitterness turn into something dangerous. But the story wasn't just about what he had done. It was also about what the young woman had survived. Each time she spoke, whether to the lawyers, reporters, or even to Daniel in quiet moments after the hearings, she did it with calm courage. There was no anger in her voice, no desire for revenge, only a wish for peace. "I don't hate him," she said once while they waited in the courthouse hallway. "I just don't want anyone else to go through what I did." Daniel looked at her and realized how much strength it took to say that. By the end of the week, the jury had heard everything. The waiting that followed was the hardest part. Hours felt like days. People paced the hallway, whispering, checking their watches. Daniel stayed seated in the back of the courtroom, trying to stay calm. Finally, late in the afternoon, the doors opened. The jury filed in, faces solemn. The foreman stood and handed a paper to the judge. The judge read it quietly, then spoke in that even, steady voice. "On the count of unlawful restraint, guilty. On the count of abduction, guilty." The room stayed silent for a few seconds. Then the sound of quiet tears filled the air. Relief, not pain. The young woman closed her eyes, whispering something Daniel couldn't hear. He felt the tension leave his shoulders for the first time in weeks. Jason showed no reaction. He simply sat there, eyes still downcast, as if the words had already been written in his mind long before they were spoken aloud. When it was over, the courtroom emptied slowly. Reporters waited outside, cameras flashing, people talking all at once. But Daniel stayed behind for a few moments, standing near the front row where she had sat. He looked at the empty chair and thought about that night on Route 57. The dark road, the silence, the moment he had heard that faint sound from inside the trunk. It was strange how a single second could change everything. That evening he visited her once more, this time not in a hospital room but at a small community center downtown where she had started volunteering. When he walked in, She was helping set up tables for a local outreach program. She smiled when she saw him. "I thought I might see you again," she said. "I heard about what you're doing here," Daniel replied. "That's really good work." She shrugged lightly, her smile gentle. "It helps me keep moving forward. I figured if I got another chance, I shouldn't waste it." Daniel nodded. "That's a good way to think." For a moment, they both stood quietly, surrounded by the simple sounds of people setting up chairs, laughter from a nearby room, and the faint hum of music playing from a speaker. She looked at him and said, "Do you ever stop thinking about the things you've seen?" Daniel took a deep breath before answering. "Not really. Some things stay with you. But I try to remember the good parts, the ones where people make it out, where things get better." She smiled again, softer this time. "Then maybe we both got lucky." "I'd say that's true," Daniel said. Over the next few months, life began to return to something that felt close to normal. The case made the local news for a while, then slowly faded from headlines. People moved on, as they always do. But for Daniel, the memory stayed, though it no longer carried the same weight. He would still drive along Route 57 sometimes, past the stretch of road where it all began. The car was gone, the field quiet again, grass grown tall over the spot where the tires once rested. But every time he passed it, he found himself slowing down, looking at the space where fate had decided to intervene that night. One afternoon, months later, he received a letter at the station. No return address, just his name written neatly on the envelope. Inside was a small note written in careful handwriting. It read, "I just wanted to say thank you again. Life feels normal again, something I didn't think I'd ever say. I started taking evening classes and I still volunteer when I can. Every time I start to lose faith in people, I remember that night and how you didn't give up when you could have. I hope you never forget that you made a difference." There was no signature, but Daniel didn't need one. He knew exactly who it was from. He folded the note and placed it carefully in his drawer. Then he sat for a moment, just listening to the soft noise of the station, phones ringing, people talking, the low hum of printers. It all felt ordinary, yet somehow more meaningful. Later that night as he drove home, the sky was clear for the first time in weeks. The stars were out, scattered across the darkness like tiny reminders that even in the blackest night, light finds its way through. He thought again of that sound, the faint noise from the trunk that had stopped him from walking away. Sometimes he wondered if it was fate or just instinct or something else entirely. Whatever it was, it had changed two lives that night, hers and his. And as he drove under the quiet stretch of road, the wind moving gently through the trees, Daniel realized something simple yet powerful. Not every hero wears a cape, and not every miracle happens in the daylight. Some happen in the quiet dark, when someone chooses to listen and to care. Months had passed since the trial ended, but the story hadn't really left anyone's mind. Not for Officer Daniel Harris, not for the young woman he had saved, and not for the small town where it all happened. Some stories just leave a mark, not because of what went wrong, but because of how people found the strength to make things right again. For Daniel, life had settled back into its steady rhythm. Each morning he woke early, brewed his black coffee, and sat for a few quiet minutes before heading out. The same route, the same streets, the same steady hum of the patrol car. On the surface, everything looked the same, but something inside him had shifted. He had always taken pride in his work, but since that night, there was a different kind of purpose behind it. He wasn't just responding to calls or writing reports anymore. He was looking deeper, noticing the things that didn't look right, listening to people when they said something felt off, because sometimes that tiny bit of attention could be the difference between disaster and hope. One afternoon, Daniel stopped by the diner near the edge of town, the same place he often went when he needed a quiet corner and a warm meal. The waitress, a cheerful older woman named Linda, recognized him right away. "You're the officer from that story, aren't you?" she said with a kind smile as she poured his coffee. "The one who found that poor girl." Daniel gave a small nod. "Yeah, that was me." "Well, bless you," she said, shaking her head. You don't know how many people around here still talk about that. You did something real special that night." He smiled politely, though he never quite knew how to respond when people said things like that. To him, it wasn't about being special. It was just about doing the job, being where he was needed, when he was needed. After she walked away, he looked out the window. The world outside moved on as if nothing had changed. Kids riding bikes, cars passing by, the hum of everyday life. But for one person out there, things were different now. She was alive, and that thought made the world look a little brighter. A few weeks later, Daniel received an invitation in the mail. It was handwritten and simple, an invitation to a small community event downtown. At the bottom of the note was a name he instantly recognized. He smiled and decided he would go. When the evening came, he arrived at the community center just as the sun was setting. Warm light filled the big hall and people were moving around, setting up tables with food, crafts, and decorations. There was laughter, soft music, and that warm sense of belonging that only small towns seem to have. Then he saw her, the same young woman from that night. She was standing near the front, greeting people and helping organize things. When she spotted him, her face lit up with genuine happiness. "You came," she said, walking up to him. "I said I would," Daniel replied, smiling. "You've been busy, I see." She laughed softly. "Yeah, I guess this is my way of giving back. We're raising funds for a local shelter. I thought if I could help someone else who's having a hard time, maybe it would make what happened to me mean something." Daniel nodded slowly, feeling a quiet respect for her. "That's a good reason. You've turned something terrible into something that helps others. That's not easy." "I had help," she said, looking at him meaningfully. "If you hadn't been there that night, none of this would be happening." He shook his head. "You're the one who kept fighting. I just showed up." They both smiled. Later, as the evening went on, the room filled with laughter and conversation. Daniel found himself talking with people he'd never met. Teachers, shop owners, even a few teenagers who were volunteering for the first time. Everyone seemed connected somehow, all coming together because one person had decided not to let fear define her life. At one point, she stood up to speak to the crowd. Her voice carried clearly across the room. "Not long ago," she said, "I went through something I wouldn't wish on anyone. It changed my life in ways I'm still learning to understand. But something else happened too. People showed up for me, people who didn't even know me. They gave me hope when I thought there wasn't any left. And that's why I wanted to start this, to give back, to help someone else who might be feeling lost or scared. Because kindness can be the thing that saves someone's life even when you don't realize it." The room stayed quiet for a few seconds after she finished, and then warm applause filled the air. Daniel felt something stir in his chest. Pride, maybe. Or just that quiet sense of peace that comes when you know things turned out the way they were meant to. After the event, as people started to leave, she found him again near the exit. "I wanted to give you something," she said, handing him a small envelope. He opened it to find a photo. It was taken at the event that night. She was smiling, standing with a group of volunteers, her eyes bright and full of life. On the back, she had written a short message. "Thank you for reminding me that there are still good people in the world." Daniel looked up at her. "You didn't have to do this," he said softly. "I wanted to," she replied. "Because sometimes we forget that people like you make the world safer just by caring." He slipped the photo into his jacket pocket. "Then I'll keep it safe," he said. Outside, the evening air was cool and calm. The streetlights flickered on as the town grew quiet again. Daniel walked slowly toward his car, feeling a calmness he hadn't felt in a long time. The sound of crickets filled the air, and somewhere in the distance, a train horn echoed faintly. As he drove home, his thoughts drifted back to that first night. The call about the abandoned car, the dark road, the moment he opened that trunk. It still sent a shiver through him sometimes, not from fear, but from the weight of how close everything had been to ending differently. But now, looking back, he realized it wasn't just a rescue. It was a reminder that even in the worst moments, there's still a chance for light to break through. When he reached home, he placed the photo on his kitchen counter and stood there for a moment looking at it. Then he picked up the small wooden box where he kept a few keepsakes from his years of service. Badges, letters, notes from families he had helped. He added the photo to the collection, closing the box gently. He knew he would carry this story with him for the rest of his life. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. Life kept moving forward. The seasons changed, the town celebrated small festivals, and Daniel kept doing what he always did, serving quietly, helping where he could, and noticing the small things most people overlooked. One spring morning, while on patrol, he noticed a young man sitting on a park bench, looking lost and tired. Something about the scene made him stop. He approached gently and asked if everything was all right. The young man explained that he'd lost his job, fallen on hard times, and didn't know what to do next. Daniel listened quietly, then pointed to the community center nearby. "They've got people who can help you," he said. "Food, work programs, a place to start fresh. Tell them Officer Harris sent you." The young man nodded, his eyes softening with a glimmer of hope. "Thank you," he said. As Daniel walked back to his car, he thought of how one small act of kindness could change the course of someone's life. Maybe that was the lesson hidden in all of this. Not every rescue looks dramatic. Sometimes it's just being there, listening, caring, showing up when it matters. That evening, he drove past the same quiet road where it all began. The field was peaceful now, the grass tall and golden in the fading sunlight. He stopped the car and got out, standing there for a moment, letting the breeze move through the air. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath. There was no fear, no sorrow, just peace. The world was still full of bad things, he knew that. But it was also full of people who refused to give up, who still believed in doing good. People like the young woman who turned her pain into purpose. People like the strangers who showed up to support her. And maybe, even people like him, who just happened to be in the right place at the right time. As he got back into his car and started driving again, he looked in the rearview mirror one last time. The road stretched behind him, quiet and endless, just as it always had been. But to him it would never be just another road again. It was the place where everything changed, not just for her, but for him too. He smiled softly as the sky turned a deep shade of orange and pink. The world kept moving, and so did he, carrying with him the simple truth he'd learned that night. Sometimes, the smallest moment of compassion can echo louder than fear, and a single act of courage can keep hope alive for years to come.